Good evening.
Good evening.
I hereby call this September the 10th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. As always, before we get started, we'd like to recognize our public safety staff and the employees who help to make public safety in this city certainly more livable. I'd like to recognize our Chief of Police, Chief Thompson. Thank you for being here. Our Chief of Fire, Chief Mayo. Thank you for being here as well. And as most of you might be aware, we do have a new Director of Emergency Management after the death of Mr. Mel Sadler. And that new person has been selected, and it's Mr. August Vernon. Mr. Vernon is not in-house, but he will be with us going forward. As we all are aware, there are some storms that are brewing that might be coming this way, and we always have asked a question of Mr. Sadler, and I think we'll continue that tradition with Mr. Vernon, are we prepared? And so since Mr. Vernon is not here and he's working on our behalf, I want to just take a moment to hear from our Assistant City Manager, Mr. Damon DeCane. Mr. DeCane, are you able to answer that question on his behalf? Are we prepared? And if so, if you can give us just a brief update on where we are with the weather situation.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good evening. Thank you.
Good evening.
August has been on board for about 2 weeks, and so we thought we'd test him out by sending a hurricane our way, and I guess we'll see how he does. So currently, emergency management is in full swing. We're in what August would refer to as a monitoring mode. As part of monitoring, we're holding daily coordination meetings with the critical infrastructure partners that we have, and that includes the school system, the hospitals, all, of course, the city and county departments that are involved in this. It's constant communication with the National Weather Service and the state of North Carolina emergency management folks as well. We had a conference call with the governor's office and staff, and this is a real threat coming our way. We could be seeing a sustained event. It's important aspects for the public to know, which is the second part of what emergency management is working on, is informing the public to be prepared. Don't wait until Friday night at 2 in the morning to secure your pets, get some cash, make sure your flashlights work, and those sorts of things. There's all kinds of resources available for lists of how to handle that, but it's not going to be like a typical thunderstorm that rolls through and causes some havoc. It'll be sustained rain, sustained wind, causing all kinds of issues. There's a public safety news conference on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Where city staff and emergency management will talk about all those things. Turn around, don't drown. Don't run your generators in your house. Don't bring your gas grill in. They sound, kind of common sense type things, but people lose their lives every year in events like this because they do those things. So they're working on that. And lastly, we're trying to figure out where we can get help from, like say the mountains, and or should we be sending help? But right now to the coast. Right now we're sort of holding our resources at home to wait and see exactly what we need here before we start to obligate ourselves elsewhere.
Are there any questions for Mr. DeCane? Mayor Pro Tem Burke?
No, I don't have a question. Let him go. I don't want to make a comment.
Mr. McIntosh.
Is there something, something that I think we all know from being in our positions for years is that the most difficult thing is to communicate with the public, to get word out. So can you guys push to us so that we can get out through our channels, just snippets of information, places to go, resources, and where to get them so that we can help get that word out? Because I think we've all got our own sort of networks that we have lined up. So I would appreciate if you guys push that to us, letting us push it out to people. Great. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I was just going to say, all day the governor has been talking on TV 14 about this, telling people what to do. He also stated that he had talked to some of the other governors, and he's also talked with the president's office about this being a place that is really serious that we should look at. So that's very important for us to know. You talk about communication. It's a possibility on our TV 13. We could over and over talk about this. And then, like these folks with the social media, is there any way you can start doing anything like that?
We can use all those avenues.
Recognize.
We can use all those avenues, social media, TV 13. It's that delicate balance of providing information, getting people prepared, but not causing panic at the same time, which emergency management, they're the professionals of how to do that.
Yes. Thank you.
And thank you for the update, Mr. DeCane. Mr. Larson.
Yeah, not wishing to be too crass about this too quickly, but obviously these things come up. and we're confronted with expenditures that maybe we hadn't anticipated in a variety of overtime and equipment, materials, and staffing and whatever. How do we handle the resources, allocation of resources in a case like this? Is this something that we actually are able to budget for in advance?
Councilor Washington, we don't budget for storms. I mean, we rely on our fund balance, our reserves, our rainy day fund, as you might want to call it. And depending on the storm, and how big of an area, I mean, I'd prefer us not to have this happen. But if there's enough damage in our area, we'll be part of a emergency national order from the president, which will then make us eligible for FEMA reimbursements. So we keep track of all of that. Finance does. We know how to do that, and if it's bad, we will get reimbursed for some of our expenses.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
And we cannot say enough to beware of the people who, because people are experiencing this trouble, they get nervous and they get different people to start working on their houses, giving them advice. So we cannot say enough about these crooks who's walking around here waiting for something to happen. And the next thing you know, citizens are paying a lot of money for trees to be moved, roofs to be put on, and certain things to take place. In fact, signing their life over because some of them have gotten in debt because of storms like this. So that should be cautioned.
Mr. Lawson.
I have full confidence in our staff, our police department and fire responders, first responders, the maintenance crews that get out and maintain the streets and whatever. I've already started experiencing some commitment on that part beyond what we normally do, and I would expect that through this crisis we will continue to see that kind of city support to the private sector where we normally might not.
And thanks again, Mr. DeCane. And as any information comes forward, if you would please keep us updated so that we can keep the citizens in our community updated as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. There was a fairly short agenda, members of the committee. Before we move into that agenda, there is one last item that we need to be aware of that has to be discussed. As you're aware, at 2 p.m., the State Bureau of Investigation, we got word that they completed their investigation of the local officer-involved shooting regarding Officer McGuire and Mr. McCrae, who's a citizen here in the community. At that particular time, the district attorney sort of gave the results of the State Bureau of Investigation, gave the report, and the footage was actually released to the media. It's my understanding that the footage may not have particularly been released to the city of Winston-Salem, and so there may be a need to formally have a resolution to ask our city attorneys to go to the courts to petition for that footage so that we can specifically have that. If there is any component, Mr. Sykes or Attorney Carmen, that I might have missed, if you please sort of speak up and let us know. But I think that we need to, by consensus, figure out how do we move forward. Did I hit that on the head? Attorney Sykes, please.
Yes, Chairman, you did hit it on the head. Under the statute that was put into place October 2016, even the city and the police department are restricted from releasing any kind of police recording without an order of the court. So at your direction, we would be prepared to file that petition, make that request to the Superior Court.
Well, one of the things, Attorney Sykes, that we promised the people of this community, I know individually we all have spoken on it, is just accountability, fairness, and transparency. I think at every level, from the police chief, the assistant chiefs, all of the staff, we've seen that. I think we've seen professionalism and that from the district attorney's office and the State Bureau of Investigation. They've done a thorough report, but I think it's incumbent upon us to move a little further and request that information. So is there anyone who is objected to moving forward and asking the courts to give us that authority? Councilmember Bessie is recognized.
I don't want to object. I just want to voice support for that. We invested in the body camera system before we had to do so in order to not only improve public transparency, but to frankly improve the safety of our officers, because it is our conclusion that we have a good, well-trained police department and officer corps, and that we all benefit. Our department benefits, our citizens, and our officers from having the full record out in public. I did not know until it was underway that the DA's office was having a news conference this afternoon, and was choosing to show select parts of the tape and not to release it to the public beyond the news conference. I certainly would have raised a concern about that had I known ahead of time. I do believe it's entirely appropriate that we ensure to the best of our ability that the full record is out so that the public can fully share our confidence in our officers' actions.
Councilman Larson.
Yeah, I have to share Councilmember Bessie's concern that I did not know the news conference was going on either until obviously it was well underway. And I think that reflects badly on the respect of this city's law enforcement and governance. And I would, if we need a motion, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to make a motion that we request that the full video be released to the public, or at least released to the city council.
I'm not going to be formal. I mean,
Okay.
I would hate to wait till Monday. If we get enough direction here, I know the mayor supports it.
Yeah.
So by consensus, it sounds like everybody's in favor of moving forward. Mr. Larson, to your point and to Mr. Bessie's point, if I'm going to be the chairman of this committee, when things are going well, I have to take the pat on the back. When things didn't go so well, I have to accept that as well. I was made aware, and I did not make you aware. I assumed that you knew, but that's an assumption on my part, and I will try to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I take responsibility for that because I knew and I didn't tell you. But moving forward, I'll make sure you're fully and completely aware. Attorney Carmen.
Point of clarification, release to the city or release to the public? I don't want it just released to council and assume that it can be released to the public, so we need to be clear if you want it released to the public.
Released to the public is the language that we'd like to use. Is there anybody opposed to that language?
Just like we did last
That is the consensus.
Okay.
Thank you, Attorney Sykes. Did you want to add anything else?
No, sir, I appreciate your support.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on that matter? Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Not that matter. I was going to say something about
You have the floor.
On Saturday, we did have 9/11. And maybe Chief Thompson would just say just a few more comments about it. 9/11.
Yeah, the public safety challenge. And Chief, I want to thank you for your strong presence at that public safety press conference a little earlier. And thank you for what you and the brave women and men of the police department do every single day. You have the floor.
It's our pleasure. Thank you, Chair Taylor, members of the committee. This past Saturday, we had public safety 9/11 challenge, and that is a challenge that we started a few years ago, working with the assistance of marketing and communications and our school system. Mayor Pro Tem Burke and other members of the city were present, or of the county, I'm sorry, were present, and basically we presented a wreath, but the biggest part of it is we spoke to our students in our schools, and it's mainly our ROTC students, and we had police personnel on hand to go through, and they were challenging each other through different drills. It was a very spirited challenge. And again, like I said, we've done this for several years, and I think our students really appreciate the support from city and county officials, as well as their local first responders. But again, as we started kind of moving away from the big events following 9/11 to kind of move forward that we had in the past, we channeled it into something a little more positive in the sense of involving the students with an interest in public safety and first responding as a future, and came up with the 9/11 challenge. So again, I want to thank Mayor Pro Tem Burke for being present and for the words in her address to the students. And also I want to publicly thank marketing and communication for the support that they always provide for us during this event.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions at this time?
No.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Members of the committee, we have a need to get down to business.
I was going to say,
Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
we should all be proud in this city because one of our citizens, born and raised in this city, became Miss America. I represent her family, and I was very pleased a couple of months ago to be at Mount Zion, and she was present to make comments there. And she was trained through the school system and the School of Arts. She was Miss New York, and then she became Miss America. And I think that we should feel proud because every time she mentions, we're going to say Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And she's an opera singer. She went to the School of Arts. And she will be presented by all of us soon,
Well.
something through the mayor's office. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought that up. Councilmember Bessie.
Very brief. I just, so one more note on the press conference this afternoon. I certainly was not intending to criticize anyone in the police department or on the council about that. It's my understanding that the terms of conditions of that news conference were set by the DA's office.
That's correct.
And that you were present as the sole permitted representative of the city council at that.
The mayor was also present and the police chief.
Right. And
So we had adequate representation.
Right. And I was more expressing my concern for the terms under which the footage was made available to the public than intending to direct any criticism at any of our three representatives at the event.
But leadership is taking criticism sometimes, but thank you for coming and trying to set that straight. All right.
And I'm going to say this, though, excuse me, our public safety chair is supposed to be at things like that. And also, when you talked about the emergency management, when we had problems, I was always with the delegation of people who came around the state to talk about the problems we have here. So our chairman should also be well informed.
Okay. Anybody say anything else? I'm going to start banging this gavel here. All right, so let's get down to business. Members of the committee, we do have a consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda, as we know, are approved with one sweeping motion unless a member of this committee or council wishes one to be pulled for consideration. Members of the committee, are there any items that need to be pulled for consideration? If there are none, we would entertain a motion. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda by Mr. Larson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McIntosh. All in favor, please vote yes. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. There are 3 items on the general agenda. We have informational items giving us information on the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network System update. There's item giving us information on the citizen police complaint and appeals process. And lastly, there's information regarding the purchase of cameras and support. Can we have item G1, please?
Item G1, National Integrated Ballistic Information Network System Update.
Giving us information on this item is our Chief of Police. Chief Thompson, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Again, Chair Taylor and members of the committee, back earlier this year, we came before this committee asking for the approval to acquire this Integrated Ballistic Information Systems Network, and committee did give us that approval. During that time, Mayor Pro Tem Burke then asked us to come back before the committee to provide an update on the benefits of the system. At this time, we're prepared to provide that information per her request, and I'm going to ask that our firearms and tool mark examiner from our Forensic Services Division, Brooke Lane, to come up and provide that information.
Ms. Lane, please do. You have the floor. Not many people come up with a smile. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Taylor and committee members. If you pardon 1 second. All right, so as Chief Thompson mentioned, we received your approval for the purchasing of this system, and on May 2nd of this year, the final installation was completed, and this is showing an image of our office where that system is now housed. Since May 2nd, that very first day that it was installed, it began to be put into use, and I have been entering in cartridge casings into that system ever since, every month. To provide some statistics to show, at least numbers-wise, some of the benefits that we received. These are the numbers for the entire annual year of 2017. To just direct your attention, the main 3 that I want to bring up are the number of firearms seized was 671, and that's seized either as evidence or as found property, not as safekeeping. The number of cartridge cases seized was 1,631 cartridge cases, and the number of potential investigative leads that we identified was approximately 12 for the year, and that's a matter of staffing and accessibility at the Greensboro Police Department and scheduling around all the other agencies that were using that system there. Now, just to further define it, the potential investigative leads is identifying one specific case to another specific case. So that's one cartridge case to another, linking them for further investigation. So for 2018, the statistics that we've had so far through the end of the month of July, the number of firearms seized is 336, so we are on schedule to have approximately the same number of firearms seized. Cartridge cases, on the other hand, are already up to 1,533, and that is only through the end of July. We still have plenty more months left to go for the year. And so far, most of these leads that we've achieved through the potential investigative leads out of this number of 39 has been a lot in-house, as well as looking at the last few cartridge cases that needed to be examined over at the Greensboro Police Department. So as you can see, just those investigative leads alone has already tripled and then some, and we haven't even made it through just over half the year for these statistics. And now, in my perspective, numbers are great and they show you data, but to give a better example, the first verified lead that we had in-house at our system, we actually had completed and verified at the beginning of the month of June. This lead, while I can't provide too many of the case details because they are still under investigation, essentially linked 4 different cases, one of which was a homicide that had no leads available to the investigator at the time. And now this provided that detective further routes to pursue his investigation. And at this time, keeping it brief, I will be happy to take any questions you might have.
Councilman McIntosh is recognized, excuse me.
The increase in the number of cartridges, any explanation as to why that? We have bigger magazines, or?
I don't, from my experience from the particular firearms that I have seen both in 2017, 2018, it's not necessarily an increase in size of magazines, because from my experience from the guns that we have seized, the magazine capacity size has been pretty consistent through the 2 years. It's, in my best guess, would just be an increase in gun crime that we have seen over the past even 6 months.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Larson.
Could you go back to your chart on the statistics for this year, the first half of the year?
Yes.
And would you explain to me what IBIS and what that actually means? Cases, cartridge cases entered into. What does that actually accomplish? What do we do?
Yes, so the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or the NIBIN system, is essentially the same term for IBIS, which is the Integrated Ballistic Identification System. So the difference between the two is just that the NIBIN is the network that houses all the data and algorithms and images, where IBIS is actually the system itself, like the hardware that we're entering these cartridge cases into. So for the statistic on cartridge cases entered into IBIS, those are the actual number count of the individual cases that I scanned into the system using the IBIS system.
So the differentiation between what you enter into that system and the 1,500 cartridges that were seized, the 442 indicates more probably the number of different weapons that we use for the cartridge counts you have?
Yes. Part of it is a little bit of a backlog, but that's very minimal because I am the sole examiner that we have at this time. So it's only me entering in the cartridge cases as well as the plethora of other tasks and duties that I have in my position. But it's also whenever we seize a number of cartridge cases at the different crime scenes, before I enter them into the system, I'm not going to enter all 60 that were seized at the one scene. So I go through and we do a system called triaging, where I will actually look at every single casing that was seized on that crime scene side by side to identify if they came from the same firearm, and also which of those casings that came from the same firearm has the best representation of markings that are going to be used for these algorithms. So the number is reduced mostly because of the triaging. For example, I can have over 100 cartridge cases seized from one scene, and I'll enter maybe 12 of those 100.
So can I assume that 442 different weapons were used in conducting crimes in Winston-Salem in the last 6 months?
Yes and no, because of those 442, some of them were firearms were used multiple times. Those 442 are entered per case. So even though I've got like 6 different cases, they might have all been fired by one firearm, and that's what this system is for, is to identify those links of which cases are being conducted by that same firearm.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Bessie.
Yes, just a further clarification. In this in this case, when we're talking about cartridge cases
Yes.
seized, we're talking about spent ammunition shells
Yes.
collected at the scene. So what you're telling us is you have seen you've seen more spent shells fired at the scenes that you've been investigating than you had last year.
Yes.
Proportionally, okay. And may I ask, regarding the firearms seized, can you characterize those in a little more detail for us? Handguns versus long arms, perhaps any salient information on the nature of the handgun seized?
Typically, from my experience of what I've seen, because I run statistics on all of the firearms seized every month and provide those statistics to my supervisor as well as the Chief Thompson. And those statistics on the firearms seized are the ones seized as, like I said, evidence or found property. Predominantly, what I'm seeing is most often not, it's pistols, pistol handguns. We do see some revolvers and some rifles and shotguns, but I would say predominantly it is pistols. For our statistics, the only ones we don't count are the safekeeping, because eventually those will return to the owners. But most often than not, it's going to be those handgun pistols. And for IBIS purposes, we enter in almost every single caliber of pistol that we come across. There's only a couple exceptions just due to the nature of how that particular pistol operates. Revolvers, there's not much of a database in the IBIS system just because of the nature of revolvers. Typically, those spent shell casings stay within the cylinder of the gun. It's not impossible, but you don't typically see people dumping out a cylinder and reloading while on a crime scene.
Now, you're using pistol as a term of art here, with which I may not be familiar. I think the distinction that I think of are the revolvers versus the semi-automatic, essentially. I started to use semi-automatic. I didn't want to sound any more ignorant than necessary.
No, I use the term pistol because through my Association of Firearm Mark Examiners, they have a set of glossary definitions, and a pistol is defined as a firearm where the chamber, where that cartridge sits when it's ready to be fired, is integral with the barrel. So it is all one piece versus a revolver, which has multiple independent chambers arranged on an axis around that cylinder that's separate from the barrel. So with pistols, you can have multiple different types of pistols, but typically the ones we are seeing on the crime scenes are going to be those semi-automatic pistols.
Do you have a rough breakdown of seized versus found property?
I would say, just from what I can recall, it's most often, it's probably about 90% seized evidence versus 10% found property. That's a rough estimate, so don't quote me. But.
And I know that we have had issues in terms of long-term evidentiary storage in the past. Have those been resolved with current facilities, or is that still an issue?
Yeah.
I'll defer to Chief Thompson on that one.
Councilmember Bessie, we are actually following state law on seizing weapons. Per state law, we have to maintain them or sell them, and we do not want to get in the business of selling the weapons and putting them back out on the street. So we are, again, following the law, and that is to store them in our evidence storage.
I guess I have every confidence that you're following the state law on that point. What I was trying to determine, frankly, was whether we were dealing with a storage capacity issue, having to expand storage for essentially useless weaponry.
We haven't gotten to that point yet.
If that legal requirement were not in place, what had been the practice of the department?
So in the past, we had a policy that governed the destruction of weapons. And so we followed that after the case was properly adjudicated in court.
This is more of a qualitative judgment question than quantitative, but I would be interested in the feedback. Are we dealing significantly with very expensive or sort of collector's item handguns seized as evidence, or is this basically the cheap stuff that you
Saturday night specials?
Yeah.
No, so we're not seeing much at all in the way of collector's items. These, in most cases, are weapons that are either have been used in the commission of a criminal offense or that they were weapons that, for whatever reason, we saw fit to seize for safekeeping.
Okay. Thank you. The only detailed questions I have at this point.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief Thompson. Thank you, Examiner Lane. I have an affinity for people who take their job seriously, and it's clear that you take your job seriously. So thank you. Yes, thank you for what you're doing. But before we move on, Mayor Pro Tem Burke asked us to come back for our knowledge. So, Mayor Pro Tem Burke, you have the last word.
I appreciate the information, the way you presented it. You prepared yourself.
Thank you.
I follow up with one question.
Councilman Larson.
Yeah, let me ask one. We've talked a lot about cartridges. Do you have processing on actual projectiles, the bullets themselves? Do you do analysis as well in your lab?
Yes. So there is another system that IBIS has called Bullet Tracks. That is one option for that. But to be honest, they're still working out algorithms, and there's a lot more variables and different ways things can be done with bullets, where it makes the algorithms not as effective. And because of that, not a lot of departments are using it just yet, so there's not much of a database to search against anyways. So that was why we elected the decision not to purchase that system as of yet until it does become a more beneficial system. But in regards to comparing those, IBIS is a way to look for further investigative leads for those detectives to be using it real time. And once they do have those leads and want to get confirmed that, say, these projectiles were fired from this firearm, that is something that I do have the ability to do in-house.
Okay.
So I can compare cartridge cases, bullets, tool marks, gunshot residue, distance determinations, serial number restorations, and a whole plethora that I'm not going to bore you with of different duties that I get to do and can have the ability to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And one question maybe for our attorneys and maybe for our chief is, and we've had this discussion before, and maybe for potential state legislators, is this something that could be handled in a local act to allow us to destroy, demolish, grind up, whatever the surplus weapons that we have stored everywhere? I mean, how do we break through this every year adding 600 more weapons to our storage facilities that we have to inventory, account for, store, maintain, what have you? We need an end of the tube. We need to be able to send these things out into metal recycling or someplace that allows us to dispose of them other than selling them and putting them back out on the street. So is a local act an option for us to request, the city to request legislature to allow us to do that?
Attorney Carmen, is it better to ask forgiveness or permission?
Yeah.
I'll answer the part about the local act. Attorney Sykes can answer the remainder of your question. I'm not sure that we can get a local act on this particular topic. I think it would have to be a statewide bill. I know there's some limitations in terms of disposal of firearms that we're having to deal with that have led to the problem that you've discussed, and maybe Attorney Sykes can elaborate further, but I think it would be a statewide bill.
Attorney Sykes, is that your understanding and recollection?
It is. In fact, when the law was changed in September of 2013, the state said you cannot destroy weapons unless they either don't have a legible serial number or they're inoperable. And so it was wide-ranging. There's uniformity across the state, so it would take a state law. We do have the option to try to trade or exchange weapons, though, and for other equipment, and that's something that has been looked at.
If I may, members of the committee, if we could just maybe have our attorneys maybe explore some options. And if it's an action that we're willing to take, let's do it. I don't really want to take the time to hash this out at this time.
I think the public just needs to understand that we're working under very tight constraints here, and it's going to take maybe a legislative act to allow us as a city to act responsibly in the ultimate curation and destruction of these weapons. And it needs to happen. I mean, we don't have a choice. We're not selling them. We're not giving them back out on the street. So let's figure out something to do with them. And it may be we need a new legislature to do that.
All right. Councilman Larson, people are not going to take me seriously if I can't keep my word. I promised Mayor Pro Tem Burke the last word on this item, so you got it.
No, I appreciate the information, and I know you're following through.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Item G2, please.
Item G2, information on the citizen police complaint and appeals process.
right, giving us information on this is Mr. Al Andrews. As he passes out the information, we do have one person that signed up to speak, Mr. David Peterman. Mr. Peterman, before you speak, is your information that you want to speak on regarding item G1, 2, or 3? No. Okay, if you just hold tight for us, please. Thank you. Attorney Andrews, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem Burke, other committee members, fellow citizens. If I can just get this. So City Attorney staff was asked to discuss and to look into the current process of citizen police complaints and the appeals process that brings matters to the Citizen Police Review Board, and then to also look at a proposal or to suggest a proposal for online intake of such matters. So we did that. What we did was we did a survey of the current process that is available to citizens, and we looked at other ways of doing it. So just to move along and to be quick, currently citizens have the availability of coming to City Hall and making complaints in person. There are different city offices that they can make those complaints, primarily the City Secretary's office. They can make them at the Police Department, at Human Relations. They can make those complaints, and they can be processed and handled. Our way of handling complaints has the complaint to be filled out in person and to be notarized so that it's an official sort of statement, if you will. And we provide space and we provide access to whatever materials the citizens would need, and then that complaint is received and it is processed. All complaints that are made are investigated by the Professional Standards Division of the Police Department, and they are handled very professionally, and interaction is made with citizens. At the end of that process of investigation, a communication is sent from the police chief to the complaining citizen, and the citizen who receives that is then able to decide to accept what has been provided or to make the decision to appeal that to the Citizens Police Review Board. And if that decision is made, then an appeal form would need to be completed, and very much like the complaint process, that's filled out, it's notarized, and it's submitted, and then it is forwarded on to the chairman of the Citizens Police Review Board, and the Citizens Police Review Board will review that matter to decide whether a hearing is going to be held. And if a hearing is going to be held, that's a formal setting by the Citizens Police Review Board. That process has been going on for some time. There are many benefits to the current process that we have. It allows for early in-person contact with citizens. Communications can be made, questions can be answered, and it can be real human touch. Any issues that are readily apparent from the information that was submitted, jurisdictional concerns, or what have you, can be dealt with immediately. Staff is proposing an online intake process for citizens' police complaints. And what would be involved, we envision, is a portal for citizens to be able to essentially log in through our city's webpage, and they could submit electronically a complaint that they would have against a police officer or police action. And we envision that vehicle being such that a citizen could not only submit a narrative of what they have to submit, but it will also allow for the current, currently people have devices and have material in different formats. Data is video, audio, or what have you, or they may have other kinds of data that can be submitted. And we are looking at ways, or we are conceptualizing ways that can be received as well. And that information would be submitted in the portal, and from that point, it would be handled and treated. And the benefits to having that is, while now complaints are handwritten and they are submitted, you might not be surprised, but I will share with you that handwriting and handwritten complaints can take many forms that don't mimic typed print. So having something be typed or be submitted in this format increases legibility and sometimes clarity, because people will review what they've submitted. It also reduces or removes space constraints that might be from a space on a form not being sufficient. If there are foreign language concerns, perhaps we can look at ways of making our intake process electronically be acceptable for people for whom English is not their first language. And we can capture data statistically somewhat maybe better by having it be an online process. And it just provides an alternative for people with maybe mobility concerns or access concerns, and also those who may not feel as comfortable coming to a governmental office or the police department to file a complaint. It could be done. Could be done that way. So there are certain benefits potentially to having an online intake process. We would still provide our human touch in that once the complaint is received, it will be there will be a verification email that goes to the complainant to indicate we have received the complaint. The professional standards department would reach out to the individual who complained to take care of some initial screening and to verify that what is in the complaint. There are times when complaints are made when it turns out that the citizen may want more immediate response, or they may have a matter that doesn't rise to the level of the need to do a full investigation. They have a point of concern or something that may not be a complaint about something that happened to them, but a complaint about something that they observed. Why did it take 3 officers to respond to what appeared to be a traffic stop without knowing what was going on, or the operational needs for that, or the traditional standard operating procedures that allow for that? And that might be a point of information exchange. There might be a confusion about whether the individual was a Winston-Salem police officer or whether they were an officer for another jurisdiction and operating right here within our own jurisdiction, our sheriff's deputies. So we could address those matters. Some types of matters are better and more immediately dealt with by the chain of command, and so we can connect the chain of command to the citizen and get a matter dealt with immediately if it merits it. Citizens will always be able to elevate their online file complaint or concern to a formal complaint, but we can sort of still be there to deal with those concerns and to process them appropriately. We envision that the online intake process would not delay the process. It would add another step, but it's also another option. But the Professional Standards Division assures that they would be able to expediently deal with these. Once they interact with the person, they still will seek to get the complaint sworn to or notarized, if you will, and at that point it can become a formal complaint, which triggers certain standards under their guidelines in the CALEA process, or the CALEA certification. So that is the option that staff has looked at. At this point, we are looking for guidance and direction from you all on which way to go or what we should do if we should continue forward. I will share with you that implementation of the online process would involve the Information Systems Department getting involved and possibly retaining a contractor to develop the platform and ensure that it is tested appropriately and works and that it can receive the various forms of data that we are speaking about. Once they do that, we would do some kind of RFP process to ensure that we have estimates of what that work would cost and would involve. And then we would present that to you and move forward with your guidance on that. So I'm available to answer any questions or concerns you have.
Mr. Andrews, Attorney Andrews, I certainly believe that the more citizen input we can get, the better. And just so the committee and the council members know where this comes from, several months back, I had a meeting with about, I would say, roughly 50 community activists and leaders who were in these chambers a couple of months ago talking about the police citizen review process. They recommended that we do an online complaint process for the police department. The chief agreed to it, and it's in Mr. Andrews' capable hands at this point. I feel like we need to move forward on it because it's a citizen-driven process. But what are your thoughts on which process we should take or whether we should move forward at this time? Councilmember McIntosh.
I seem to be understanding from your comments that there's nothing on the shelf that's available for us to go get. Right? So this is, once again, we're kind of leading edge and looking at an online solution.
So to answer your question, there's not exactly what we are proposing. We are aware of at least another jurisdiction that allows for an online process. It doesn't look to be proprietary, that it's market, that it was somehow created in-house. So we would be, in a sense, heading on the front edge, the leading edge, by doing this in the way that we contemplate doing it.
Is there a way for us to, if we come up with the solution and we hire the contractor, for us to own the solution and make money on it?
I like that idea. That's a good idea.
Because we have a really robust group of entrepreneurs and coders. We have a very strong startup community. Last Friday was startup demo day down at Winston Starts, and I think that capability exists in our community, and if we can partner on that and since we're the ones doing the funding, participate in the backside of it. I'd love to see that.
Attorney Andrews, is it possible that we can, after you make your comments, excuse me for interrupting, can we also hear from Mr. Tom Koreska about that? I saw maybe some, and if you don't have anything to say, that's fine, but this is what you do. We want to hear from you. Attorney Andrews.
So just to get to Councilman McIntosh's great question, of course, there's always possibility, and the way that you obtain possibility is through the funding mechanism and the volume of funding. So we could acquire intellectual property rights, certainly, or share those, depending upon how that contract is. That does affect the upfront cost, but I think I take the idea from you to explore options of partnering and maybe looking at defraying costs for doing something that way. I'll let Mr. Perez speak to that.
Yeah, a solution like this, I see a couple of components. One is the data intake, as Al suggests, or listed, and then there's putting it in the database. And then there's another piece of component I'll call workflow. So in the back end, you do it kind of like your in-house workflow application. We would build that workflow approval process and who reviews it. My staff that work with Al Little, and there's not a lot of off-the-shelf products for this today. There are products we can use for the data intake. For example, our new website. I was one of the earlier meeting. We use a form today called Laser Feast for open enrollment for our employees. So there are ways we can take the data in, and I think we would probably want to use some product we have or to purchase real cheap, take the data in, put it in a database, customize it for our own workflow needs, and we would own all of that. And when I think of a contractor, it wouldn't necessarily be a seller or reseller of a product, probably be more a developer to help us tie the pieces together, and it would certainly could find local help to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chris. Any comments? Councilman Bessie? And we'll come to Councilman Larson.
Just a quick question. I'm assuming the proposal here is the online complaint option as opposed to eliminating the in-person and okay, that's
right.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Larson.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my question, is how many portals do we have? And currently for the police receiving complaints, I suspect they come in off the telephones. I suspect they come in off of the 311 lines or chat lines, whatever we have. This proposal is another way to do it. I don't know whether it's going to generate any more simplicity and clarity. I mean, it's just going to be another avenue. Still going to have to be sort of a determination of hierarchy of, well, is this a complaint that somebody didn't get to my house fast enough, or I was mistreated in a traffic stop. I mean, there's levels of concern that a citizen could bring forward, and how that then is handled, I think, is what I'm hearing is that the personal touch is still going to be very much present at the very earliest stages, that the initial contact to the city may be through this door, this mechanism, but ultimately how we as a city, how the police force responds is still going to be a very directed, targeted, personal encounter of some sort. Is that more or less the way we will handle it? That's my perception of this. So really the question is, if you don't have a computer, you don't have an iPhone or whatever, you can't get to one, which is not going to be true in about 30 minutes probably, then you still have the avenues of phone calls, walk in the doors, get in the chief's face first time you see her. Those options will exist as calling council members. I mean, I think that as we've played that role for years of being a conduit of complaint to the police or any part of the city's operation. So I applaud the effort. I think it's the future for us to be working on. I think it will require a great deal of work and refinement, but like we just heard earlier on the creating the new website and everything, it provides another platform, which I think is what the future is going to ask us to have.
Agreed. Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Yes, thanks for the report.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we get many complaints for the Citizens Review Board?
So the complaints that initially come into the police department are of one volume. The appeals, which is what the Citizens Police Review Board would deal with, is a different number. So we don't have a large volume in my estimation of either, but those items that are complaints that graduate to be appeals, that number for us thankfully is not large. And every appeal that does come in, the Citizens Police Review Board looks at them, studies it and reviews it carefully and makes a decision on having a hearing. But to me, the number is not outsized.
When we first started with the Citizens Complaint Review Board, we had a police department where there was poor communication. People were not getting along. The police themselves were not getting along. And that's when Mayor Wayne Corbin, I was the chairman, and he said, what about having some citizens in this city look at the police department and make some recommendations? So cross-section of business people, lay people met, and they thought that we did need to do something with our police department for them to get along better, to have a working relationship, and to understand that people were going to be treated fair, right, and with respect, and that they would not show differences in the neighborhoods that they would go into, and also the level of education some people had, how they would be treated. So then from that, some of the people who had contact, like some of the ministers in this community, of citizens complaining to them, then that's when I thought it would be good, along with the Public Safety Committee, that we would have a Citizens Review Committee. But to me, as I have observed it, we have not a, we have what I call a more of a calm police department, and people who seem to want to work together and understand that the police is here to work with us. But citizens, too, have to have responsibility. They have to understand how they address police and how police address them. They have to understand if they have problems, they don't take it in their hands, but that's why we have the Citizen Review Board, so they can come. And when I hear Attorney Alan Andrews say that we don't have that many, that's a plus for us. It means that we're doing something right. And so I think as we look at it, if anything needs to be amended, suggested, recommendation, we're open for that too. But I say to our police and I say to folks, remember they're human too. And it's the way you talk with them, and they have been trained to do something with those guns. So you need to think before you step out there. And I don't think as a council person would support what's wrong, and that we must treat police with respect. And I think our city is doing a pretty good job with this. I don't want to talk too quick, Chief. I think we're moving pretty positive with the relationship that the police department is developing with neighborhoods, going out talking to associations, and then how with the younger children and people. So it's a good report.
Attorney Andrews, it sounds to me that the consensus is not to eliminate the in-person complaint process. We are the City of Arts and Innovation, and this is just one more way that we're going to be innovative. So if we can just move forward with establishing the online process, working with Mr. Koresh and his department, I think that's the consensus of the council and the committee at this time.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Anything that I might have missed?
No, you did cover everything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the
Thank
report. Members of the committee, one last item on the agenda, item G3, please.
Item G3, information regarding purchasing cameras and support.
We've talked Mr. Koresha up. Mr. Koresha, you have the floor.
Good evening, Chairman Taylor.
Good evening.
Good evening. Council members. This is an informational item, and it's really not a high dollar amount, but it's a preload to the bigger things to come, and that's one reason we decided to put in front of you tonight. Back in 2015, we had 15 cameras, and today we have 150 plus cameras in this facility, in the Stewart building, and a few others, and that's going to grow tremendously. So this has to do with kind of managing that growth. In 2015, we did an RFP, and we purchased a solution called Video Insight, which allows us to manage our cameras. It allows the staff to set up groups. So recreation parks can see certain only camera or video that pertains to their facility, and police can probably see all of them, and council could see different cameras. So we have that in place today. It's called Video Insight. And a couple of projects on this year's work plan. There's the Benton, which is 35 or so cameras we're going to roll out. And there's what's called the Downtown Phase 1 Police Camera Project. And what this item's about is we're looking for a partner to help us manage these cameras. This RFP that we sent out recently, I didn't put all this in the memo, I apologize. We're working on a statement of work as we talk. But the first year would be simply a $4,000 cost, and it will go up to $8,000 the second, third year optional. But what this contract with this vendor will do is they'll give us support for the video insight, our cameras, all the hardware, and they're going to give us a guaranteed pricing for 3 years to come for different types of cameras we need, whether it's 360 or tilting or zoom-in capabilities. 2-hour response time to our cameras. They're on site to either fix them, how they replace them, and they'll do site-through, walk-through assessments as we go to new facilities or parks, what have you. And then the last thing, they do training for staff. So this contract we're working on, it's again $4,000 the first year, but it's really a prelude to what's to come, because if later in the memo I mentioned there's the Benton cameras, and then there's the downtown cameras for Corporate Plaza and Winston Square, and those have a bigger dollar take to them, obviously. What I mentioned in the memo is you take that management solution called Video Insight and our contract to help manage all this in a standard structured way, and you tie it into assets like our buildings and our fiber, 120 miles of fiber around the city. And it's really building a framework for expanding the use of cameras throughout the area. Glad to answer any questions.
Questions or comments for Mr. Koreski? Councilmember McIntosh.
How many firms do this type of work?
We only actually had 2 firms reply to this. One is the local one we're going to recommend in Winston, and the other is out of Charlotte. There's not a lot because we're asking to be on site quickly. We didn't get it. There's other firms, I'm sure, in different areas of the state and outside the state. But I think our new practices for procuring services and our local and MWBE encouragement is helping keep us local. And that's good, because this is the kind of operation you want someone local who you can reach out and grab quickly. We don't want to be waiting for someone to come in from Greensboro or Charlotte. So we only got 2 responses. We sent it out. We had well over 20 who were interested, but I think they backed off because, it's a small dollar amount. What you really got to do, they're buying into being our partner.
Right.
And obviously, if we expand our cameras in the years to come, and if we purchase cameras from them, for example, there's an opportunity there.
As you know, I'm always worried about getting locked into a vendor.
Right.
With the body cameras, we kind of got locked in with Taser. I would like to know that we're not putting ourselves in a position to get locked down by this one company to then get hit.
Yeah, and this is strictly support. It's 1 year, second and third year optional, and we can certainly work in a 60-day notice if we want to get out of the contract. For sure, it's more of a service contract when I'm coming to you.
This question is more for the city manager than you, but what's the status on the original project for downtown cameras?
Mr. Garrett.
That's really Mr. Koreski, because we moved that project to Tom. So.
Okay. We are at a point now where we reached out to. Here's the approach we're going to take for Corporation and Winston Square. We are also looking at Marshall Plaza. This goes back to Chief Roundtree's initiative a couple years ago, and I was asked last year to get involved. We're backing off on Marshall Plaza because of all the development in that area. We're looking at Corporation Plaza and Winston Square, and I had PCT, which is the vendor that laid all our fiber, the 120 miles of fiber. They did a site walkthrough, and the plan is to run fiber from kind of the corner of 3rd and Liberty by the old Sheriff's Building and take it from there to the 3 parks. They gave me an estimate a few months back for around $80,000 to hang all the fiber. The company that RCS I looked at for the cameras to put 2 or 3 poles in each park and the cameras, and now we're just talking Corporation, of course, and Winston Square, but they gave an estimate of roughly $80,000 for all 3 parks. So we're looking at $160,000 for 3 parks, and when I did my estimate, I gave you $110,000. I backed out $50,000 for Mercer because it's probably, it is the closest location. I mean, it's not exact, but so I'm looking at around $110,000, and that would be the Corporation Plaza and the Winston Square.
My concern is that covering the parks with cameras is great, but we've got 1,500 new residents downtown since we started this discussion, and thousands of new visitors, and they're not all in the parks. They're on 4th Street, they're on Trey Street, they're soon to be on Liberty. And when we first discussed cameras downtown, my impression was that we were going to be covering the streets, streets where the activity is
occurring. Can I speak to that?
Now I'm hearing that that's not the focus of this.
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
Come up with a smile with passion. He's gone. So here's why I think we should proceed with that. Because another project is the Benton, and we're going to put 35 or so cameras in Benton. But if you think about it, and this goes back to Chief Roundtree showing me his original map a few years ago, if we're going to be putting cameras in the Benton, well, we can also aim them. So now we can cover Fifth Street. Fifth Street. We can go up Cherry both ways. So as we put cameras in the Benton and these parks, I think we can easily add on. For example, the Sawtooth, I suspect if we asked them, they would have no problem putting some cameras. So I think we hit the streets through I mentioned the assets, and we could use, for example, the Benton and just aim the cameras outward and hit, Fifth and Cherry. So I hear what you're saying about the streets. I think the way to go after it is to, the telephone poles or the light poles, et cetera, like we're doing on 4th Street right now with Duke Energy.
Mr. McIntosh.
How much did we originally allocate for the camera project? Any idea?
The original contract that was a company called Wildfire was $62,000, I believe it was. And
It's just going to take a commitment for some more.
Well, we didn't get anything from that contract. We're backing out of that contract. I'm working with Mr. Lawson, John Lawson.
But it's going to take more resources on our part to do what we want to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And since we didn't go with a 4th police district downtown, and we've got thousands of new people down there, this to me sounds like a relatively inexpensive way to increase the safety quotient down there. I'd love to have both more officers on the street, but if I can't get that, I'd love to have more cameras covering the areas of activity that are most traveled, which is 4th Trade. I mean, we all kind of know where they are. The parks is great, but to me, this is a first step.
Yeah, and again, if we're putting these poles in the parks, there's no reason we can't put cameras pointing out. I think that's Marshall Street, I believe, at Winston Square, and 2nd Street and Corporate and Plaza. It's getting the poles up. You can put cameras 360. And again, my vision is someday we're going to actually work with private folks. So if there's a camera hanging on Sawtooth,
I would think right now we could go to property owners downtown and say, "Can I hang a camera on your building?" And you would get 100% participation.
I think we've talked to a few. There's some legal work to work out as far as leases or contract for hanging something out of a private building. But my thoughts are once we even have the relationships, we can deputize those cameras. For example, there's an IT firm on a corner of 2nd and Broad, and they've told me, I've worked with them on my other role, and they said more than once the police department's come to look at their camera because of accidents. Right. Well, at this video insight solution, we all have the ability to deputize our camera, bring it into our system for a couple hours, and then release it back.
As Ms. Burke said earlier this evening, we have poured lots of money into the development of downtown. The reputation of our downtown can change pretty rapidly with a couple of bad incidents. So if we don't have the ability to make people feel secure down there, then we stand to lose a tremendous amount. So the faster we can push into that arena, the better.
Mr. Koreska, I certainly believe that this is a step in the right direction. I don't want you to misconstrue that. Councilmember McIntosh, also consider, the larger 5,000 or 10,000 foot view. We understand that tourism and development in downtown is well over a $900 million business. They do butter our bread, but let us not forget also the other folks in our communities that butter our bread who are also having challenges, who also request cameras. And I know, for example, Easton, there was a homicide there. We are working to do some things in certain communities, but I think there are plenty of other areas. Like we all represent the entire city, but we all work in the ward process as well. I don't have a part of downtown, but every time I go to a community meeting, I have some areas who say we need cameras. So I don't want to take away from what we're doing downtown. I just want to include in the larger conversation that there are other areas who might need them as we consider expanding the camera systems. Thoughts? Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
As you were talking, I was thinking about all this dumping we're having problems with in neighborhoods.
Thank you.
And I was wondering, would cameras be put in some of those neighborhoods?
I can answer that.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm going to speak too much, but I met with the director of community development, and I think there are some cameras that are currently being purchased in partnership with Parks and Recs that will be implemented in several problem areas across the community. Assistant City Manager Ford, do you want to add to that, please?
Sure. So we did work on purchasing cameras in partnership with Recreation. They came in early spring. We're in the process now of actually deploying those in various locations. Because they were purchased with community development dollars or CDBG dollars, we do have locations where they have to be based on certain census tracts. But we can provide a list of where those cameras will be going, and they're primarily focused on areas that we're having with problems, illegal dumping, so that we'll be able to catch some of those. So we can provide a list of those, but they're actually being deployed, and they should be out within the next 6 to 8 months.
Thank you. The reason I bring this up because I was told sometimes back community development was put in, you could get a camera put at a certain place where there was a problem, but we continue to have those problems. So if you put a camera there, then you take that camera back, the dumpers come back again and dump more. So how long will it stay? How would you do those?
The intent is for these cameras to remain in place, so they will not be rotating to other areas.
Yeah, I believe you shared a little bit with me about that, too.
I will.
I believe you shared it earlier. When you stated that you would be looking at cameras. So your cameras be different than the ones that
They are. It would be a different system.
I has configured those cameras, working with Marla's group, and they're solar powered, and they just hang. I'll say freeform. There's no need for network connection, and they're not real time in terms of if you want to see the footage, you have to kind of go up to them and download the data through Wi-Fi. But they'll serve the purpose, sure. And they're solar powered, and they're about this big, and they're pretty interesting instruments.
The conversation around the community cameras make the conversation that we're having around the downtown cameras a little bit more palatable. But I'm just asking for equity as we continue to move forward. I do know, Mayor Pro Tem, I do know of some specific locations. It's not a secret, but I don't want to say it because we're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to address some of this stuff in these communities.
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember McIntosh, did you have any additional comments from Mr. Koreska? Is there anyone else who has any additional comments from Mr. Koreska?
Thank you.
Councilman Larson, hold 1 second.
So we got two different kinds of cameras. We have ones that are self-contained, and then we got ones that are basically wired into a monitoring system someplace.
Yeah, the ones that are using with community development are self-contained. They basically store data, and they're solar driven. And when something happens, they can go regularly, just go up and collect that information, download the video basically.
But you have to actually go to the location of the camera to recover the data.
Not on a network today.
Yeah. So the dumping issue that I share with you. In fact, I've had an inquiry recently of a continual dumping on one of my streets, Buchanan Streets, and they said, why can't we put up a camera? We can put up a camera now. We will be able to, at least at some point, police, whoever, to look for that continual problem.
In fact, we have 120 miles of fiber that we own.
Yeah, well, I'm not looking to hardwire this thing. We're looking to find out a license plate number or something. So I think I think this is a fine plan. I do agree that I think we need to put it particularly in highly populated areas such as the Benson. We have visitors. We've got thousands and thousands of visitors coming into this town, highly susceptible, obviously, to a strange place. And the reassurance of having good security around in that area is excellent. I think if the downtown merchants are anxious to add security to their frontage, there is a mechanism with the second type of camera that could be added by the merchants themselves and installed immediately. And I would encourage them to think about that, particularly if we have vagrancy issues and things that are continuing to haunt certain parts of the downtown that we know are a problem. To record those, document them, and show a continual problem on tape, I think would be an incredibly useful thing, and I would encourage the 4th Street merchants to look into that. I will look forward to seeing a hard proposal from you to implement the program that you're talking about. Okay?
Assistant City Manager Ford, did you want to add just something additional to the conversation?
I would just say that we would need to get some additional information about the location. The cameras that were purchased with community development, the locations were based on certain income data to justify the use of community development dollars. So I just want to make sure that we have some conversations. If there's some other places, we may need to look at how to support cameras going in those locations.
Yeah, I think.
Please do.
I think litter and trash, is a universal problem in this city, and it needs not to be strictly dictated by economic neighborhoods. You have a variety of places where people are dumping stuff that it shouldn't be dumped. And if your program doesn't cover that, then we need to know that fairly quickly so that we can address it in areas that are not maybe eligible for your kind of funding.
And I also heard that the cameras can be used based on calls for service. Previously in the area, I heard they're so innovative that they talk to illegal dumpers and the whole nine. So we'll try to get more information as we move forward about the cameras. So it sounds like everything's, I know this is information, Mr. Koresh, it sounds like things are moving as a go. We're moving forward.
In October with this support contract and more information about the police cameras and as well as the Benton.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, that completes our agenda. We did have one person that signed up to speak, not on either three of those particular items. If it's in order, we can afford them maybe 3 minutes to speak to the committee. Speaking to us is Mr. David Peterman. Mr. Peterman, you have the floor, and you have 3 minutes, sir.
Apologize to everyone. I usually have at least points and everything else.
If you can give your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. I'm David Peterman, spelled Peterman. I reside at 1001 Gloucester Road, Winston-Salem. I am the director of Off-Road Vehicle Emergency Response Team. I'm going to explain to you really quickly, if I could, who we are and why we're here. Very quickly, 5 years ago, we came up with the concept of a group of enthusiasts that have specific skill sets. And during the Atlanta ice storm, we watched a group that kind of took over and helped local first responders handle that weather situation rather well. Quickly, we decided as a small group that we would get together and come up with a quick plan of action for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And quickly, within 2 weeks after they got hit, so did we. With that being said, that incident, we answered over 100 vehicles that were off on the side of the road, a couple of calls of people being stranded. As a matter of fact, one call that we received, a mother and a small family had enough provisions for adults and other children, but they were running out of provisions for the baby. As we all know, babies tend to have a different set of needs than most adults and children do. We quickly took care of that. After that incident, we decided that we could do more than just help in snow and weather events such as that. We are off-road enthusiasts that opportunity to use skills and training in emergency situations for the purpose of helping others in our community and to support the first responders in emergency response efforts. What that states is the fact that our fellow first responders, the police department and the fire department, we do not want to do their job. We easily tell everyone that we want to be the ones that answers the call for the cat stuck in a tree. Let the fire department handle the fires, let the EMS handle the direct emergencies, let the law enforcement handle the laws. What we would entail do is if there's a traffic accident, we can handle the scene while the officer is safely doing his due diligence with that scene. Currently, we are 40 plus volunteers across the United States. There are 10 of which that are here in Forsyth County. We are also been on standby since the governor put the state on the state of emergency. We work closely with emergency management here in the county. I'm sure everybody knows who Robert Reese and Michelle Brock are. For the last 5 years, we handle any odd calls that the dispatchers and first responders get that does not fall under their responsibility. They tend to hand it to us. That being, say for instance, there's a person that needs dialysis and they need a ride to the dialysis. Then we handle those calls that help that out. Now, as far as the current situation with the weather, we are all trained in disaster, CERT team, wilderness first aid, which is extended first aid. It's not exactly first aid, but go ahead.
You have the floor, Mr. Peter.
That's right. Basically, what I'm doing here today is to let you know that we're here, and this was a pilot organization that started here in Forsyth County. For you as the council and for first responders that are here behind me, we are now stretching out into other states. So what we start here is what we're doing across the state and across the nation. If you have any questions or if there's anything that you would like to know, I have a phone number and I have a an email address, and I will stick around for any questions that you may have.
Mr. Peterman, if you could leave your information with Assistant City Manager DeCane.
Sure.
I actually met with August Vernon today, who is the new Emergency Management Director. I'm sure you're aware of him.
I am, yes.
You've got great timing. He's a wonderful guy. He seems to be a great leader, and I think he certainly entertained the innovation of what you do. So if you can leave your information with us, we'll follow up with you, determine how we might be able to better partner.
Michelle Brock and Robert Reese, we work with them quite a lot. So they are very, very, very familiar with what we do. So they do utilize us quite a bit.
Thank you for your service. Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Yes, we want to say thank you. We cannot have enough volunteers, and especially during the times when we're having trouble times. Not too long ago, there was 2 people who met with the city manager to talk about what they felt that they need to be doing in the city because we're so disconnected. And when things like this happen, people get nervous, and then what people will do, they will prey on the elderly homeowners, and they start doing things on their property, not doing them properly. So even though, as the chairman said earlier, are we ready? We ask that question all the time. Are we ready for things like this? We've never been put to the test.
We were about to, yes, ma'am.
And we need to know that we are ready, because we don't need to be going from place to place. And
yes, ma'am.
So many of the people we've experienced from, not the major kinds, but those that have not been major, how some of the elderly people who
yes, ma'am.
don't have people to assist them,
mm-hmm.
they're staying in homes that they don't own. Homes get all rainy and mildew and molded up, and they're there. So the group that met with us not long ago, they were talking about how can you communicate clearer for folks to understand that somebody's really caring about them.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that he would go to the emergency department and talk about this, because I think what we have done, not meaning to be unkind, I believe that they have heard us, but sometimes not as clear as I think they need to hear us.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we experienced from the meeting we had with someone from the department who needed to be more well informed in some of the questions that were asked by these people.
Yes, ma'am.
So we need to we take you seriously.
Certainly.
We take you seriously, because
Thank
those who are elderly, we need you. We're in our neighborhoods, and certain things happen to our houses, and then we call these people out in the street who don't really care, and they come in and they charge folks, and they get them all excited. So
that's one of the beautiful things about our
organization. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. One of the beautiful things about our organization is we are a nonprofit.
Yes.
The state does recognize us as a volunteer first responder group. The beautiful thing about our organization is that not only does Forsyth County have access to our group, any emergency organization across the state, other states, doesn't matter where, if they need us, they have that ability to contact us. And we have more than enough people to handle emergency situations. As a matter of fact, I have everybody on the eastern seaboard that I have contacts with are ready and packed in case North Carolina needs our help.
Well, Mr. Peterman,
Yes,
in conclusion, thank you again on behalf of the committee for what you do for our community. I thank you for coming and informing us of what you do, and I think those citizens who are here and those who are watching on TV 13 are well informed. So collectively, you are appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And if you leave your information, Mr. DeCane, we'll get it disseminated. Is there any other business that should be considered by this committee for the good of the order? Seeing no further business, we consider this meeting to be adjourned.